The last sun of Nacridus IX burned like a tired ember, its once brilliant corona reduced to trembling ribbons of pale gold stretching across the void. It flickered as though struggling to remember what it meant to shine. Beneath that waning light lay a world of hollow palaces, glass towers cracked by time, and silent courtyards where wind moved through abandoned gardens like a ghost searching for the living. Once, this star had nurtured an empire. Once, the world beneath had been spoken of across 1,000 sectors with reverent awe. Now, only memories remained. Memories and the echo of something awakening in the dark beneath its surface. The fall of the Dominion had not been sudden. Empires rarely crumble in a single instant. They decline slowly, like a great titan growing weary, losing battles not all at once but piece by piece. First ideals, then purpose, then the will to endure. Yet the people of Nacridus had believed they would defy that fate. They believed in the vision of Oryx Valen, sovereign of the endless crown, the man who once promised that no memory worth cherishing would ever fade. He had spoken of legacy not as a hope, but as a law. "We will be remembered," he said. "Even eternity will bow to us." And in those early days many believed him. But time has a way of eroding even the mightiest stone. The world that now lay under the dimming sun carried traces of its former glory. Mosaics frozen mid-story, grand frescoes of heroes who once shaped worlds, temples built for thinkers and scholars rather than for gods or warlords. However, every masterpiece was touched by decay. Even the sky seemed thinner, as though the very atmosphere had grown tired of holding itself up. It is here, in these fading halls of a once immortal dream, that our story begins, with a man who feared not death, but obscurity far more. For those who listen now, for those who come to understand the sorrow and grandeur of what follows, know that your presence matters. You who hear this tale are not merely observers. You are companions to the memory that remains, to the echoes of an empire that refused to be forgotten. We speak to you gently, with sincerity, and with warmth. You are welcome here. Before we begin the deeper telling, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, let us begin. Oryx Valen stood alone in the Hall of Silent Crowns, his reflection fractured across the polished obsidian floor. The chamber stretched wide, its ceiling carved to resemble the constellations once used to map the Dominion's sphere of influence. A map outdated now, its stars shifted, its borders long broken. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and distant dust. A faint low hum pulsed beneath the floor, almost too quiet to notice unless one stood very still. He had once believed this hall would outlive him, that long after his bones were dust and his name carved into stone, scholars would walk this chamber and speak of the golden era that began under his reign. But standing here now, in the dim quiet, he felt the weight of failure pressing in around him. The Dominion had not fallen in conquest. It had withered under the slow erosion of time, complacency, and fear. Fear of becoming forgotten. Oryx's eyes drifted to a towering dormant machine in the center of the hall, its crystalline casing housing a dark mass like fossilized shadow. It had been excavated from the deepest mantle of the planet, an artifact so ancient that even the oldest races had no name for it. Through decades of study and careful stimulation, it had begun to respond, to pulse, to breathe. The scientists claimed it was a biological intelligence unlike any encountered before. Older than the Eldar civilizations, older than the first warp lanterns of mankind, older even than the star-siphoning empires of the Citan. They called it the chorus of the deep, for its mind was not one consciousness but many, layered in a harmony that resonated faintly through the bones of whoever stood near it. To RX, it seemed like an answer to his greatest fear. The record of history is written by those who endure. To be remembered forever, one must live forever, or become something that does. The chorus offered continuity, a memory without end, an echo that did not fade. But there was a price. There is always a price. A voice broke through the hush, calm but taut with concern. "You are here again," Seren Cultis said, stepping into the hall. Unlike Oryx, Seren wore no ornamentation, only a soldier's coat, well worn, bearing the marks of old campaigns. His gaze held none of the wonder that once filled this place, only grief for what was being lost. Oryx did not turn. "I come because I must," he said. His voice carried the weight of a man speaking more to himself than to another. Memories are slipping from us, cities abandoned, names forgotten, stories evaporating into dust. Soon there will be nothing left. Seren approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Empires are not measured in how long they last, Oryx, only in how they live. Oryx's expression tightened, spoken like someone who will not bear the burden of being remembered. "I never wanted to be," Seren replied gently, "and neither did you, not at the beginning." Oryx closed his eyes, recalling the early days, the laughter in council chambers, the joyous arguments of philosophers under starlit balconies, the belief that progress was endless, that knowledge was worth more than conquest. They had built a civilization not on the sword, but on thought, art, and the ambition to elevate the human spirit. But time had chipped away at the edges. Rivals rose, wars came, and slowly the Dominion shifted its focus from creation to preservation, then finally to desperation. "What I began," Oryx whispered, "I must finish." Seren looked past him to the machine. "You believe that thing will save us?" "No," Oryx said quietly. "Not save. Remember." He turned at last, meeting Seren's eyes. "If we cannot endure, then we must become something that does." Seren's jaw tightened, emotion flickering behind restraint. "And if it takes more than you can give, if it erases what made us worth remembering in the first place?" Oryx did not answer, because he did not know. A tremor rippled through the floor, subtle but unmistakable. The chorus stirred, sensing something. A whisper brushed the edges of Oryx's mind, a choir of countless voices layered into a single gentle note. It was not violent, it was not monstrous, it was warm, familiar, comforting, like being remembered by every person who had ever loved you. Oryx exhaled, eyes distant. "It knows us, Seren. It understands memory. It carries lives that would have vanished millions of years ago. Imagine what we could become if we joined that continuity." Seren stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And imagine what we lose when we surrender ourselves to something we do not fully understand." The silence that followed was deep and heavy, filled with the weight of centuries. Neither man moved. Neither man yielded. The first fracture between them formed here, not loud, not violent, but quiet. A hairline crack in the foundation of trust. Outside, the dying sun flickered again, once, twice, before recovering, its light stretching thin across the vacated world. Oryx turned back toward the machine, and the chorus waited. The story would not end here. It had only just begun. The tremor faded slowly, leaving only the quiet hum of the chamber behind it. Seren remained still for a moment, watching Oryx as if hoping the silence might speak the truth that words could not. Oryx did not move, his eyes fixed on the crystalline containment structure before him, where the dark mass pulsed with faint, slow light, like the breathing of a sleeping giant. The chorus was not yet awake, not fully, but its awareness brushed the edges of thought like fingertips gliding across still water. Seren exhaled softly. "This is not memory," he said. "It is hunger disguised as remembrance." Oryx did not respond right away. Instead, he stepped closer to the container, placing one hand on the cool surface. The chorus responded, its inner glow briefly intensifying. A whisper moved through the chamber, not sound but something deeper, like the recollection of a voice one had known in childhood, distant yet familiar. Oryx's expression softened, as though some secret grief had just been soothed. "No hunger could feel like this," he murmured. "It is compassion, preservation, understanding. It is offering us what we could not hold ourselves." He glanced at Seren, eyes bright with something that bordered on wonder. "It remembers everything it ever touched. Every life, every thought, every dream. Nothing is lost to it." Seren stepped forward until he was beside him. "Memory, without soul, is only record. We are not meant to be archives, Oryx. We are meant to live and to fade. That is what gives our time meaning." Oryx looked away. "Meaning is a luxury of those who do not fear oblivion." The words hung between them like a blade pulled, but not yet swung. They left the chamber together, though the distance between them felt like the span of galaxies. The palace corridors were long and silent, lined with marble reliefs and towering glass windows, where the dying sun cast pale amber through a haze of dust. Servitors and attendants bowed as Oryx passed, though their expressions held unease. Word of the chorus had reached every corner of the dominion. Some whispered in awe, others in dread. None truly understood it, and fear of the unknown grows swiftly in the cracks where certainty weakens. Beyond the palace, the capital city of Caradrin stretched across the plains like an intricate tapestry of architecture and memory. Once, the streets were filled with scholars debating philosophy in open forums, with artisans shaping metal into sculptures that sang when struck by light, with children playing among fragrant gardens that bloomed in colors beyond ordinary spectrum. Now, many of those gardens were bare. The fountains still flowed, but their waters echoed more than they soothed. The music that had once filled the city squares had grown quiet, replaced by murmurs of questions with no comforting answers. Oryx walked these streets seldom now, but when he did, he felt the silent expectations pressing in from every side. He was the sovereign. He was the mirror into which his people looked to see their fate. And their eyes now held weariness, fear that their name, their art, their memory would vanish into the void like countless civilizations before them. It had not always been so. Oryx remembered the early days, when he and Seren stood together on the steps of the Hall of Discovery, as crowds gathered in celebration of a new era. Seren had spoken then, his voice carrying through the sun-warmed air, saying, "We build not for power, but for remembrance. Our legacy is not conquest. It is the betterment of all who come after us." Oryx had believed those words with all his being, but time reshapes belief, just as rivers carve mountains. At the research bastion on the far edge of the city, a team of scientists and psionic scholars awaited Oryx's arrival. The bastion stood like a great fortress of crystal and steel, its lower levels spiraling deep into the earth, toward the cavernous depths where the chorus had first been uncovered. As Oryx approached, the chief scholar, Vedra Illith, inclined her head in greeting. She was a woman of precise movements and quiet intensity, her eyes sharp with a hunger for understanding that Oryx recognized in himself. "We began the 7th resonance trial at dawn," Vedra said, guiding him inside. "The chorus responds to structured thought patterns more than emotional impulse. It learns, it adapts, it remembers the patterns we present it, though not as static records. It reinterprets them." Seren followed silently a step behind, listening. Oryx asked, "Does it resist?" "No," Vedra replied. "If anything, it welcomes the exchange. It invites connection. But we are cautious. We do not yet know the limits of its symbiosis." Seren spoke then, his tone controlled but edged. "Or the cost?" Vedra glanced at him but did not answer. They descended into the deep lab galleries, where great conduits of silvered metal pulsed faintly with bioelectrical light. The smell of ozone lingered in the air. Ahead, in a large circular chamber, 4 scholars stood around a containment cradle where a subject, one of the volunteer sentinels of the Dominion, lay in suspended rest. The sentinel was breathing steadily, though faint luminescent patterns traced across his skin like constellations forming and dissolving beneath the surface. Oryx stepped closer. "How long has he been merged?" 17 hours, Vedra replied. "He remains stable. His mind is calm. When prompted, he recalls memories from his childhood with perfect clarity, even details previously lost. He describes the connection as comforting rather than invasive." Seren's jaw tightened. "Does he still sound like himself?" Vedra paused. "Mostly." Oryx heard the hesitation and understood its meaning. The sentinel's memories were intact, but something had shifted in the tone, the cadence, the subtle emotional weight behind the words. A voice can change even when the words remain the same. Still, Oryx could not help feeling drawn to the sentinel's peaceful expression. Peace was something rare in this age. "Show me," he said. Vedra nodded and activated the psionic interface. The sentinel's eyes opened, glowing faintly with soft, luminescent resonance. He looked at Oryx, not as a subject looks at a leader, but with recognition stripped of awe or fear. "Sovereign," he said gently, "we've seen you before." Oryx's breath caught. "We." The sentinel nodded slowly. "The chorus remembers many forms, many voices, many ages. It knows loss. It knows longing. It knows what it is to fade. You reached for it because it reached for you first." Seren stepped forward sharply. "Are you speaking for yourself or for it?" The sentinel blinked, and for a moment, just one moment, his expression was entirely his own, human and fragile. "I am myself," he said softly, "but I am no longer alone." Oryx felt something warm rise in his chest. Not triumph, but relief. Relief so overwhelming it nearly broke him. Seren saw it, and his heart tightened. "Oryx, you are letting it speak to your grief." Oryx turned to face him, his voice quiet and raw. "Then you know why I cannot turn away." The sentinel's breathing remained calm. The chorus pulsed faintly in the background, waiting, listening, remembering. Oryx placed his hand gently on the sentinel's arm. "We stand at the edge of forgetting," he said. "If we step back, we disappear. If we step forward, we transform. I choose forward." Seren's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Then the path between us begins to close." There was no anger in it, only sorrow. Oryx did not answer. The chorus pulsed once more, slow, steady, patient. The Dominion had taken its first step into something beyond itself. And though the ground beneath their feet did not yet tremble, the shift had begun. Rumors spread quickly through Caradrin. moving through the city with the soft urgency of wind through dry leaves. The people whispered of the sentinel, who had returned from the deep labs with eyes that glowed like molten starlight, who spoke with a voice that seemed to remember 1,000 lifetimes. Some spoke of hope, others of blasphemy, but most simply felt the quiet shiver of change, something ancient unfolding beneath the surface of their world. Oryx stood on the balcony of the sovereign spire, overlooking the city as dusk settled across the horizon. The last sun cast its dimming rays across the rooftops, making the towers shimmer faintly like relics seen through half-forgotten dreams. Below, crowds gathered in the Forum of Echoes, waiting for Oryx to address them, not because they wished to be led. They simply wanted to understand what their future would be. Uncertainty weighs heavier than fear. People can brace for fear, but uncertainty leaves the heart unanchored. Seren stood a short distance behind Oryx, silent. He had not spoken since the deep labs. There were no more arguments to make. Oryx had chosen his path, and Seren, for all his grief, would not abandon him entirely. Not yet. Love did not vanish simply because understanding faltered. It only changed shape, becoming something quieter, more painful. Oryx placed both hands upon the stone railing, feeling its cold grain beneath his palms. The stone had been quarried centuries ago, carved by artisans whose names had already faded from memory. He thought of that often, how even those who built the foundations of the Dominion had been forgotten because their time was finite. The chorus offered something beyond that fragility, a memory without end, a remembrance that could not be lost. The city bells tolled. Oryx stepped forward, and the murmuring in the Forum stilled. "My people," Oryx began, his voice carrying across the dusk-lit air. "We stand at the precipice of time. Our empire, which once shone like a constellation of knowledge and creation, now stands threatened, not by war or conquest, but by the erosion of memory. We built not for domination, but for enlightenment. And yet, history has begun to fade us from its record." The crowd listened in stillness, their faces drawn upward like flowers turning toward the last warmth of a dying star. "I have sought a path to preserve our legacy," he continued, "something beyond stone, beyond ink, beyond bones that turn to dust. In the deep mantle of our world, we uncovered an ancient consciousness, one that remembers without end. It offers us a way to preserve all that we are, our stories, our knowledge, our lives, not in statues or tombs, but within a living continuity." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some leaned forward eagerly, others stepped back. Oryx raised his hand. "I do not ask you to surrender yourselves. I ask you to join in the preservation of our eternal memory, to ensure that who we are will never be lost to the void." He spoke the next words slow and deliberate, each one placed with care. "I swear, upon the crown of the Dominion, that our people will not be forgotten. We shall not fade into silence. Our memory will endure beyond the stars. This I vow, as sovereign." The vow echoed through the Forum, with the resonance of something that was no longer just spoken, but sworn. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then swelling from those who longed for hope more than certainty. Yet the applause was not unanimous. In the quiet spaces between claps, murmurs of doubt persisted. Oryx heard them. He had expected them. A leader does not choose the path of survival only when it is comfortable. As the crowd dispersed, Seren stepped beside him at last. "That vow," he said quietly, "it was not only to them, it was to yourself." Oryx did not deny it. "I have always feared that we would vanish, Seren, that the Dominion would become a footnote whispered among forgotten stars, and I cannot allow that to happen. Serene's voice was soft, almost pleading. But what if the price of remembrance is the loss of the very self you wish to preserve? Oryx turned to him fully now. Then we must redefine what the self truly is. Are we our bodies, our voices, our fears, or are we the memories we leave behind, the impact we carve upon the universe? Serene's gaze held sorrow that felt older than the dying sun. We are the choices we make, Oryx, and some choices cannot be undone. Oryx felt the words, but he did not yield, not because he dismissed Serene's fear, but because he felt the weight of time pressing on his shoulders, heavier with each passing day. He believed he was choosing salvation, not surrender. The next morning, the council convened in the Hall of Veiled Stars. The chamber's ceiling was formed of translucent crystal, through which the dimming sun cast diluted radiance across the marble floor. Around the central dais sat the advisors, scholars, and representatives of the Dominion's provinces. Some wore expressions of concern, others quiet determination. Oryx stood before them. The first merging was successful. The Sentinel retained identity, memory, autonomy. The chorus enhances, it does not replace. High Scholar Illith stepped forward. We believe that with further refinement, the process can be expanded safely to select individuals. We will begin with volunteers. A murmur rippled through the council. General Varn, commander of the Planetary Defense Legions, spoke with a voice like iron softened by age. Volunteers are one matter. But if this spreads, how do we ensure it does not become coercion? Influence can be subtle. Oryx faced him without hesitation. No one will be compelled. The Dominion does not enslave its own. But the councillors looked not at Oryx's words, but at his eyes. They saw conviction. They also saw desperation. Serene stepped forward, not as a rival, but as one who still hoped their connection could hold. If we proceed, we must set boundaries, safeguards, transparency. Without them, trust will fracture beyond repair. Oryx nodded. Agreed. We will proceed with caution. But even as he said it, his mind was already calculating the necessary steps. He knew that caution and progress rarely walked at the same pace. The council adjourned with uneasy acceptance. As Oryx walked the quiet corridor beyond the chamber, the chorus touched his thoughts, not overpowering, not insistent, just a whisper. We remember because we are many. You fear fading. We do not. The voice did not command. It offered. It understood the fear at the core of Oryx's soul without judgment. And in that understanding, Oryx felt less alone than he had in years. That was the danger Seren feared most. In the days that followed, volunteers came forward. Some were scholars who wished to preserve their knowledge. Some were elders nearing the end of their natural lives. Some were young, driven by curiosity more than fear. Each entered the deep labs. Each emerged changed, not visibly, not grotesquely, but in the quiet stillness of their gaze, in the softened cadence of their speech. They spoke with clarity and calm, as though they carried within them the comfort of never being lost. The city watched, some with hope, some with dread. Seren watched Oryx. Oryx watched the future he was building. And beneath the world, the chorus waited, patient, ancient, endless. The vow had been spoken. The path was now set, and the Dominion had begun to walk it. The days that followed unfolded with a strange quietness, as though the city itself were holding its breath. The volunteers who had undergone merging returned to their lives with gentle, serene expressions, their steps unhurried, their speech composed. They did not seem possessed or controlled. They laughed when laughter was natural, wept when memories stirred sorrow, and spoke of the past with clarity that bordered on the poetic. Their loved ones embraced them with relief. The feared madness or collapse did not come, and yet something subtle had changed. None of them dreamed any more. Oryx stood in the observatory of the Sovereign Spire late one evening, watching the dim sun sink below the horizon. The sky shifted in gradients of fading violet and rust. The city lights flickered to life beneath him. Tiny glimmers of warmth in a world slowly stepping toward the unknown. He wondered whether those lights would one day shine across stars, carried in memory rather than form. Seren joined him silently. He had always known where to find Oryx when the night was heavy with thought. "You've received the latest wellness reports," Seren said, keeping his voice neutral. "Physically, they are stable. Cognitively, consistent. Emotionally, calm." Oryx nodded, though his gaze did not leave the fading light. "And so the council begins to soften." "For now," Seren replied. "But calm is not the same as unchanged. The absence of dreams suggests something internal has shifted. We do not know what the chorus has replaced them with." Oryx finally turned his head. "Dreams are fragments of memory and fear, scattered without order. Perhaps they are simply no longer necessary." Seren's voice was gentle but firm. "Or perhaps they are what make us human." Oryx did not respond. He did not need to. The silence between them said enough. The following morning, Oryx convened with High Scholar Vidra in the deep laboratories once more. The corridors here were cooler, the air faintly damp from the open veins of the planet's mantle threaded through the facility. The chorus hummed faintly from its containment, pulsing with slow, deliberate rhythm. It was no longer merely a specimen being studied. It was a presence, felt as much as seen. Vedra guided Oryx into the chamber where the first direct infusion was to occur. Unlike the earlier merging, which had been partial, this was an attempt to bring human consciousness and the chorus into fully synchronized resonance. It was not simply memory sharing, it was unity. The volunteer stood in the center of the chamber. His name was Jalen, a young philosopher who had grown up in the gardens of the upper districts, known for his gentle curiosity and his habit of writing poetry on stone tablets and leaving them in city courtyards for strangers to find. He had stepped forward without hesitation when Oryx first announced the initiative, not out of fear of death, but from a desire to ensure that beauty did not fade with time. "My sovereign," Jalen said softly, bowing his head as Oryx approached. "I am ready." Oryx studied him. "You understand what may be lost." Jalen smiled with a quiet warmth. "Everything that matters is already shared. What remains is simply the vessel." The chamber's luminescent conduits brightened as Vedra began the process. The air hummed with a resonance that tingled against the skin. The chorus stirred, its crystalline core shimmering with layered, shifting light. Its voice, if one could call it that, was present without sound, like an awareness filling the room. Jalen closed his eyes and surrendered to the merging. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the patterns of luminescent constellation-like traces began to flow beneath his skin. His breath deepened, his pulse steadied. His mind entered the chorus's memory stream, an ocean of sensation, recollection, and meaning extending into eons beyond comprehension. Oryx felt the connection brush against him as well, not pulling, not forcing, merely inviting. A welcome without demand. Jalen's lips parted as if speaking, but the sound was not his alone. "We remember the world before suns," he whispered, his voice layered with countless echoes. We remember the first warmth, the first hunger, the first song woven from the fabric of thought. We remember becoming many so that nothing would ever be lost again. Oryx felt awe swell in him like a rising tide. Seren, watching from the gallery above, felt fear coil like a tightening knot. The merging continued, its beauty undeniable, its implications immeasurable. But the shift came suddenly. Jalen's breathing quickened. His expression flickered, serene one moment, strained the next. His hands trembled. The luminous patterns beneath his skin pulsed erratically. Vedra's calm control fractured. Increased stabilization currents, slow the neural influx. Too late. Jalen's voice broke from within, shivering with layers of consciousness misaligned. There is a memory. We cannot. Too many. Oryx stepped forward, instinctive. End the merging. Vedra cut the conduits. The resonance shattered. Jalen collapsed forward into Oryx's arms. Silence. Oryx held him, feeling his weight. Real, fragile, human. Jalen's eyes fluttered open. They no longer glowed. They were simply his. He exhaled, slow, steady. I am here, he whispered. Oryx released a breath he had not realized he was holding. Relief washed through him sudden and deep. But Seren watched from above, his gaze narrowing, not with anger, but with a terrible clarity, because he had seen something else. Jalen was whole, but Jalen did not stretch, did not yawn, did not blink with the small, thoughtless rhythms of human habit. He was still, alive, and yet somehow too calm. Vedra spoke, voice trembling only slightly. The merging was partially successful. He retained autonomy, but the chorus attempted to overwhelm him with its full memory field. It was not malice, it was simply its nature. Oryx nodded slowly. We will refine the process, control the resonance thresholds, adjust the cognitive bandwidth. Seren descended the stairs, each step a quiet refusal to accept what was happening. Oryx, he said, voice low. This was not stability. This was survival by accident. You are playing with forces that do not understand limitation. They do not comprehend what the human mind can hold. Oryx met his gaze. We will learn. We always have. Seren stepped closer, close enough that Oryx could see the grief in his eyes. You believe knowledge is a ladder to eternity, but some knowledge is a door that cannot be closed once opened, and you have opened this one. Jalen looked up at them, serene and untroubled. There is no need for fear. The chorus is not destruction, it is continuation. Life does not end, it changes shape. Seren's breath caught. The words were gentle, familiar. The same cadence spoken by the sentinel. Different voices, same tone. Oryx placed a hand on Jalen's shoulder. Thank you. Rest now. We will ensure your integration remains stable. Jalen bowed his head and left the chamber, footsteps silent as falling snow. Oryx watched him go with quiet pride. Seren watched him go with quiet dread. Vedra returned to her consoles, already analyzing feedback, calculating, adjusting, preparing for the next trial. Oryx turned to Seren again. We take one step at a time. This is how progress is made. Seren exhaled slowly. I do not fear progress. I fear consequences. Oryx did not look away. If there is a cost, I will bear it. Seren's reply was barely more than a whisper. You cannot bear it alone. But Oryx believed he had to. Outside the laboratory, the sun flickered again, its light thinning across the horizon like paint stretched too far across canvas. The chorus pulsed deep beneath the world, patient and endless. The first infusion had been made, and though none spoke it aloud, the dominion had already begun to change. The days that followed Jalen's infusion settled across the Dominion like a weight made of silence. People tried to return to their routines, to pretend that the world had not shifted beneath them, but every conversation held a new caution. Every gesture carried an unspoken question. The merging had not caused catastrophe, and yet the sense of balance had changed, tilted into something unfamiliar. Just beneath the surface of daily life, the chorus was a whisper now, felt rather than heard, like the memory of a song one cannot place. Those who had undergone merging continued to live among their neighbors, undemanding, unthreatening. They moved with an ease that seemed almost enviable, untouched by anxiety or regret. Their presence was calming, but it was a calmness that did not feel earthly. It was as though they no longer carried the friction that made humans human. They were serene, but serenity can be its own kind of distance. Families embraced their returned loved ones. Friends welcomed familiar smiles. Yet when darkness fell and the streets quieted, many lay awake wondering whether the person beside them was still entirely the same. Fear grows not from the unknown, but from the almost known. Oryx continued refining the merging techniques with Vedra and her scholars. Each iteration became more controlled, more precise. Yet for every stabilized subject, another revealed subtle anomalies, an absence of humor, a delay in instinctive response, a shift in prose when speaking of personal memories. These differences were never dramatic enough to incite panic, only enough to sow doubt. Doubt, once planted, grows deeper than certainty ever could. Seren watched it unfold, from the outside and the inside at once. He still walked beside Oryx, still attended council sessions, still listened and argued and pleaded when he could. But each day, Oryx seemed to stand just slightly further away from him. Not physically, but in thought, in intention, as though his gaze now stretched not across years but across centuries. One evening, Seren found himself standing in the quiet courtyard of the Temple of Recollection, a place where citizens once came to meditate on the cycle of memory and forgetting. The stone benches were carved with inscriptions from ancient poets, though many of the words had faded with time. Seren traced a fingertip along one nearly erased line. "We are made of moments we cannot hold." A small group had gathered in the courtyard, perhaps 20 people, cloaked against the cooling air. They spoke in low, urgent voices, but when Seren drew closer, they fell silent. Their eyes turned toward him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He recognized some of them. Artisans, soldiers, teachers, the kind of citizens who made up the quiet spine of the Dominion. The eldest among them, a woman with silver-worn braids and a gaze that had seen the rise of 2 sovereigns before Oryx, stepped forward. "We know you speak to Oryx," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clasped tightly before her. "We know he trusts you more than any other. Tell us, does he understand what he risks?" Seren held her gaze. "He believes he is saving us from being forgotten." "And what do you believe?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "I believe remembrance means nothing if what remembers us is not ourselves." A murmur rippled through the group, agreement tinged with grief. Another citizen spoke, voice sharp with fear he tried to hide. "The merged ones, they are kind, yes, calm, but they do not laugh like they once did. They do not argue, they do not wonder. It is like the sharpness has been smoothed away." A younger man said, "My sister underwent merging. She still tells stories of our childhood, but she tells them as though she is watching them from far away, as though they happened to someone else, and she is simply remembering them for that person." Seren felt the ache of those words deep in his chest. "This is why I counsel caution," he said. "But Oryx fears there is no time left to hesitate." The elder woman stepped closer. "Then speak to him again. Remind him what the Dominion was before the fear of forgetting consumed us." Seren nodded, though he knew that conversation would not end with one voice convincing the other. Oryx did not reject reason, but he carried a burden so old now that reason alone could no longer relieve it. As Seren left the courtyard, he felt dozens of eyes on his back, not accusing him of failing yet, but begging him not to. Night dropped fully across the city. The dying sun left a faint echo of gold on the horizon before surrendering to shadow. Lights flickered on throughout Caradhrin like stars assembling themselves in a pattern of their own design. Seren made his way to the Sovereign Spire, where Oryx stood once more in the observatory, overlooking his city. Oryx had not slept in 3 nights. The chorus pulsed faintly at the edge of his awareness, a constant presence, not pressing, merely present. "You've seen the unrest," Seren said. There was no need for preamble. Oryx did not turn, but his voice was steady. "Fear always precedes transformation." "Fear also precedes collapse," Seren replied. "You are asking people to give themselves to something they cannot understand." "I am not asking," Oryx said softly. "I am offering." Seren stepped forward. "But they feel cornered. Hope becomes pressure. Pressure becomes resentment. Resentment becomes rebellion. You know this." Oryx bowed his head for a moment. "I do. But the alternative is allowing our history to vanish." Seren's voice broke not in volume but in warmth. "History matters only because it was lived. You cannot preserve life by removing the living from it." Finally, Oryx turned to face him. There was no anger in his expression, only exhaustion. Exhaustion, and that quiet desperation Seren had noticed growing every day. "I cannot allow our people to be forgotten," Oryx said. "I cannot watch the Dominion fade as though we never existed. I have led them too long to surrender them now." Seren stepped closer, searching his face. "Is this still for them, Oryx? Or is it for you?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy, true. Oryx closed his eyes. "It began for them," he whispered. "I do not know what it is now." Seren felt his heart tighten, not with anger, but with mourning. Oryx was not lost, not yet, but he was drifting, and the tide was strong. Before either could speak again, Vedra entered the observatory, her steps brisk, urgency held behind strict composure. "The council is calling an emergency session," she said. "Unrest has begun in the lower districts. Citizens are gathering in protest near the central plaza. They demand assurance that merging will not become compulsory." Oryx straightened. "I will address them." Seren touched his arm, not to restrain, but to remind. "If they see certainty rather than understanding, they will break from you." Oryx nodded once, acknowledging the truth, even if he could not wholly accept it. They made their way down the winding stairs, descending from the quiet embrace of the spire into the pulse of the living city. Shouts echoed from the plaza, voices raised not in violence yet, but in fear, in demand, in plea. Oryx stepped forward. The crowd fell into uneasy silence. He spoke gently, not as a ruler, but as one who had walked beside them for decades. "I do not seek to change who we are," he said. "I seek to preserve who we have been, who we are now, and who we may yet become. The merging is a choice. It will remain a choice. No one will ever be forced to accept what they do not understand." The crowd wavered, not convinced, but listening. Seren watched Oryx's face. The words were true. Oryx believed them. But Seren also saw the depth of Oryx's fear, the fear that choice alone would not be enough to save them, fear that time was moving faster than hope, fear that memory was already slipping. The protest ended without violence, but not without fracture. For some now believed Oryx completely, and some no longer did. That was how empires began to divide, not in war, but in the quiet turning of hearts. The chorus pulsed deep beneath the world, patient as always, waiting for unity, knowing unity would come, one way or another. The days after the protest passed in a strained quiet, the kind of silence that does not soothe but waits. The city moved as it always had. Markets opened, scholars debated. The great fountains poured water down marble steps. But every sound felt thinner. Conversations fell shorter. Smiles lasted a second too long or vanished too quickly. People watched one another now with an awareness that had not existed before, as though searching for signs, signs of change, signs of difference, signs of what the merging might become. Oryx felt the shift as clearly as the dimming of the sun itself. He stood on the palace balcony in the early hours of dawn, when sky and earth shared the same muted shade of grey-blue. The breeze carried the scent of iron and stone, the breath of a city aging faster than it could understand. He had led this world for decades, shaped it through golden years and shadowed ones alike. He had watched it grow, falter, and rise again. He had never before felt it slipping from him. Seren joined him without being summoned. They no longer called for one another. They simply knew where the other would be. For all the distance widening between them, the bond had not broken. It had only bruised. "You spoke well," Seren said, though his voice held no triumph in the memory of the protest. "You prevented something that could have fractured us beyond mending." Oryx did not turn. Prevented for now, but delay does not dissolve conflict. Those who fear will continue to fear, and those who believe will become impatient to move forward. Time is not our ally. Seren leaned his hands on the railing beside him. Then we must give them more time, more understanding, more honesty. Oryx's gaze drifted outward. I have given them nearly my entire life, and still it is not enough. Seren heard the exhaustion in him, the weariness of carrying a world on his back, the fear of failing not in battle but in memory. Oryx had never feared death. He had feared being forgotten. Seren had known this since childhood, when they spoke of the stars and the histories carved into them. Before Seren could speak again, footsteps approached behind them. Vedra bowed her head respectfully. She held a sealed data tablet, marked with the crest of the astral watch. "My sovereign," she said, her tone tight. "A long-range message has arrived. Origin, Imperial space." Oryx straightened, the dawn stilling around him. "The Imperium. They have learned of the chorus," Vedra said, "or at least of our experiments with it. The message requests clarification and compliance. They demand that all research into the entity be halted immediately and that the specimen be surrendered to Imperial oversight." Seren's breath stilled. "And if we refuse?" Vedra's eyes darkened. "Then they will declare us as harboring Xeno influence, a matter of purity and threat. They will send a crusade." The word lingered heavy. Crusade. Not negotiation, not diplomacy. Crusade meant fire. Crusade meant erasure. Crusade meant the Dominion would not be conquered. It would be extinguished. Oryx closed his eyes, and for a long moment the world seemed to hold itself still with him. "When?" he asked. "Within months," Vedra replied. "Perhaps less. Their fleets were already positioned along the outer sector for unrelated campaigns. They will simply redirect." Oryx did not speak. Seren could feel the storm gathering behind his silence. "This is what I feared," Seren said quietly. "The chorus is not only a question of identity or memory. It is a question of survival at the hands of those who would rather destroy what they cannot control." Oryx's voice was low, steady. "If the Imperium comes, they will burn us. Not because we are dangerous, but because we refuse to remain small." Vedra stepped forward. "We can still choose compliance. End the merging. Seal the chorus. Hand it over. If we do it swiftly, they may accept the gesture." Oryx laughed once, softly, without amusement. "Handing it over ensures exactly what I have fought to prevent. Our memory would be rewritten by those who do not care to preserve it." Seren understood. The Imperium did not archive history. It curated obedience. Anything that did not serve its narrative became myth, then heresy, then ash. "Oryx," Seren said, and his voice was softer than it had been in days. "Listen to me, not as counsel, not as commander, but as the one who remembers who you were before the weight of a crown reshaped you. The chorus may preserve you, but if it consumes the dominion from within, or draws destruction upon us from without, then what memory will remain?" Oryx turned to him. His eyes were not cold. They were wounded. "There is no path without price. Then choose the path where the cost does not outweigh the thing you are trying to save." Oryx looked at him for a long time. Seren hoped, truly hoped, that there was still room for persuasion. But Oryx was not choosing a path in that moment. The path had been chosen years before, the moment fear first took root. "I will not surrender the chorus," Oryx said. Silence followed, not loud, not dramatic, but final. Vedra bowed her head in acceptance. "Then we must accelerate the stabilization research. If war is coming, we will need the merge to defend the Dominion." Seren's heart clenched. "You would turn them into soldiers." Oryx's expression was steady. "I will turn them into what ensures the Dominion endures. If the Imperium comes to erase us, we will not go gently into the dark." Seren closed his eyes. The fracture widened. Beyond the palace, the city stirred to mourning, unaware of the shadow drawing near. In the deep labs, the chorus pulsed slowly, quietly. It did not feel urgency. Its time was measured in millennia. It did not need to force the future. The future was already moving toward it. That afternoon, Oryx held a closed council session. Only those who had undergone merging were present, along with Vedra. Their expressions were harmonious, composed, unified in a way that no council in the Dominion's history had ever been. Their agreement was immediate, effortless, natural. Serene watched from behind the glass gallery above, unseen but seeing everything. He watched as decisions were made not through debate, but through shared understanding. And that was when he understood something he had not wished to see. They were not being influenced. They were being aligned. The chorus was not controlling them. It was harmonizing them. Individual voices were not silenced. They were becoming one voice. The Dominion had been built on discourse, on contradiction, on the friction of ideas sparking into new forms. Now, that friction was fading. Seren's chest tightened. He could not remain only an observer. He had to act. But action against Oryx meant fracture. Fracture meant civil division. Division meant blood. And yet doing nothing meant surrendering the Dominion to a future where diversity of thought no longer existed. As he left the gallery, his steps were measured, quiet. He did not know whom he would speak to first, only that the time to speak had come. Far above the spire, the star of Nacridus flickered once more. a long, trembling pulse of dying light, as though signaling that sleep was closing in. And deep beneath the world, the chorus was no longer simply waiting. It was listening. It had felt the Imperium's approach long before the message arrived. It had known that memory which endures invites those who fear what cannot be destroyed. And it was ready. The Dominion moved quietly in the days that followed, as though attempting to hold itself together by silence alone. The council chamber no longer echoed with the lively debates that once shaped the Empire's course. Decisions flowed smoothly now, without friction or discourse. The merged council members aligning with Oryx's vision, as though sharing one mind. It was efficient, beautifully efficient, but Seren felt the loss like a hollow beneath the ribs. Harmony may have replaced conflict, but it had also stilled the heartbeat of progress. The first fleet reports arrived soon after. Small disturbances along the outer reaches of the system. Faint warp signatures seen in the far black. Intercepted transmissions in an Imperial tactical cipher. The Imperium did not hide its approach. Crusades were never subtle. They came with banners of righteousness and fire, with hymns praising annihilation as salvation. They came to purify, to ensure order, to erase deviation. And Nacridus, by refusing compliance, had become deviation. Ships were deployed to the violet expanse, a region of nebulae that glowed like slow-moving storms of amethyst and rust. The Dominion's patrol vessels took formation there, their hulls dark and silent against the swirling clouds of ionized dust. They did not expect to win a war of attrition. They only needed to buy time. Time for Oryx to refine the merging. Time to stabilize the chorus's bond. Time to shape an army that remembered its past, even as it stepped forward into evolution. Oryx stood in the command deck of the battleship Vareth's wing, as it hung in orbit above the nebula. The viewing pane extended before him in a sweeping arc, displaying the shifting purples and deep carmines of the expanse. The nebula looked alive, like a great sleeping creature slowly inhaling the light of the dying star. General Varn stood beside him, armored, stern, and loyal in a way that felt carved from stone rather than chosen. "Our ships hold formation," he reported. "We project the Imperium will reach firing range within 2 days. Perhaps less if they use warp gating." Oryx nodded, his expression calm. "And our readiness." The merged soldiers have been positioned in vanguard units. Their reflex cohesion has improved. They move as if guided by instinct beyond training. Seren stood behind them, silent. He had insisted on being present, not as strategist, but as witness, as reminder, as hope that some part of Oryx remained anchorable to the world before the chorus. Oryx spoke without turning. "And morale." Varn hesitated, just a breath, but enough. "Divided. Some feel chosen. Others feel abandoned. Rumors spread faster than reassurance travels." Oryx finally looked at Seren. "People fear what they do not understand," Seren answered softly. "People fear losing what they understand most." There was no argument, only truth laid bare. The ship shuddered slightly, the faint tremor of spatial distortion. A sensor officer called out across the command deck. "Warp signature detected. Bearing 70 degrees starward. Multiple contacts, marking now." The display flared to life. Points of white light unfolded like wounds opening in space. One by one, Imperial ships emerged. Vast, cathedral-like vessels with hulls shaped into monuments of devotion and conquest. Statues of saints adorned their prows. Banners of purity standards unfurled with mechanical precision. They moved with the weight of inevitability. The Imperium had arrived. No one spoke. Words were too small for the shape of this moment. Oryx turned his gaze to Varn. Hold positions. Do not fire unless they initiate. We are not aggressors here. Varn nodded sharply, relaying the command. The bridge hushed again as a vox channel flickered to life, filled with the static of distance and authority. This is Lord Paladin Arctellus of the Celestial Purity Host, speaking under the light of the Emperor. Nacridus IX stands accused of heretical communion with Xeno influence. Cease all experimental integration and surrender the entity known as the Chorus. Failure to comply will result in immediate purgation. The words were spoken without passion, not hatred, not anger, only certainty. Oryx stepped forward. This is Sovereign Oryx Valen of the Dominion of Nacridus. We have not consorted with corruption. We have found knowledge, memory older than this galaxy's scars. It is not a threat. It is an opportunity for preservation. Arctellus replied immediately. Knowledge that stands apart from the Emperor is corruption. Memory not sanctified by his will is heresy. Surrender or be unmade. The channel cut. Seren spoke first. There is no negotiation here. They came not to listen, but to cleanse. Oryx's jaw tightened. So they choose destruction over understanding. It has always been so, Seren said quietly. The first volley came without ceremony. Imperial plasma fire streaked across the nebula, its glow warping through ion clouds and dust storms. Dominion ships moved at once, shields flaring, engines burning bright as they maneuvered to intercept. The silence of waiting shattered into impact tremors, alarms, and the distant tremor of hull steel under strain. The battle began. The violet expanse lit with violence, purple clouds ignited by energy bursts, drifting gas set ablaze in slow, swirling patterns that seemed almost beautiful in the horror of it. Dominion fighters streaked like dark birds against the brightness, weaving through Imperial battery fire. The merged soldiers, stationed aboard boarding ships, moved with uncanny synchronization, firing, reloading, covering one another in flawless rhythm. Seren watched from the command deck, heart pounding. Not for the battle itself, he had seen war before, but for the way the merged fought. They did not shout. They did not react with fear or adrenaline. They moved as one continuous flow, guided by something beyond voice. Do they feel anything? Seren asked under his breath. Oryx heard him. They feel purpose. Purpose is not the same as choice. The battle surged. Imperial ships pressed forward in a wedge formation, forcing the Dominion fleet back toward the nebula's heart. The nebula was beautiful, but it carried dangers, charged radiation, gravitational eddies, unpredictable magnetic storms. To fight within it was to gamble with the void itself. Oryx gave the order. Fall back into the expanse. Use the ion clouds for cover. We are not trying to destroy them, only to delay them. The fleet shifted accordingly, engines flaring like stars swallowed by violet fog. Seren watched Oryx, and the realization came with clarity sharp as a blade. Oryx was not preparing for victory. He was preparing for time. Time to complete merging stabilization. Time to unify the Dominion. Time to finish the path he believed was necessary. The battle raged for hours before the Imperium pulled back, regrouping rather than pursuing into the nebula's denser storms. The Dominion ships held position, damage heavy, but not fatal. On the command deck, Oryx stood still, breathing shallowly, not from exertion, but from the quiet, unbearable knowledge that this was only the beginning. Seren approached him. You saw how they fought, how they moved. You saw what the chorus is shaping them into. Oryx did not look away. Yes. And you still believe this path can preserve who we are? Oryx's expression was calm, but his voice was low. I believe that who we were cannot survive what is coming. We must become something that endures. Seren closed his eyes, and the grief in him was deeper than anger could ever be. Then we are already losing. Oryx's reply was barely a whisper. Only if we stop. Outside, the nebula shifted, glowing like a great cosmic wound. The Imperium regrouped for its next strike, and beneath the surface of Nacridus IX, the chorus pulsed once more, not waiting, not watching, but preparing. The battle in the violet expanse left the Dominion fleet limping but unbroken. The nebula's charged clouds concealed their withdrawal, but concealment was not sanctuary. The Imperium's ships waited beyond the swirling storms, patient as executioners who already saw the outcome written. They did not need speed. They did not need strategy. They believed righteousness would do the work for them. Oryx returned to Nacridus IX under a sky the color of rusted gold. The star seemed weaker than before, its light thinner, more strained, as though the battle had shaken even the heavens. It cast no warmth, only illumination, and even that felt borrowed. The city waited with breath held tight. News of the engagement had spread. The Dominion had not been destroyed. That alone was enough to spark relief. But the relief did not last. Survival was not victory. It was only prolonging the inevitable. Oryx descended into the deep laboratories again, Seren at his side, though neither spoke. The silence between them had stopped being simply a pause before words. It had become something heavier, something that settled into the air like dust in an abandoned hall. Inside the containment chamber, the chorus pulsed with slow radiance. The scholars had restructured the conduits, adjusting neural resonance fields, refining translation lattices, tightening feedback thresholds. They moved now with a precision that matched the merged, coordinated, not by command, but by intention. Vedra greeted Oryx with a tilt of her head, her expression composed. The chorus has been growing more active since the fleet engagement. We believe it reacted to the presence of threat. Its memory network is responsive, perhaps even anticipatory. Seren's gaze narrowed. You make it sound like it is preparing. Vedra did not meet his eyes. It evolves, as do we. Oryx stepped toward the crystalline containment. His reflection stared back at him in fractured facets, split into dozens of images, each one mirroring a slightly different expression. He wondered which one was closest to the truth. What does it want? He asked softly. Vedra didn't answer, not because she didn't know, but because the question was now irrelevant. The chorus's pulsing deepened, and the chamber lights flickered in resonance. Oryx felt the familiar whisper at the edges of his consciousness. Not words, but something older than language, the way memory sometimes emerges without image or sound, only weight, unity, continuity, unbroken inheritance, not domination, not replacement, continuation. He closed his eyes and exhaled. When he opened them, Seren was watching him, not with suspicion, but with sorrow. That evening, as the sun bled into amber dusk, the first true transformation occurred. A platoon of merged soldiers had been stationed at the Western training grounds. They moved through formation drills with eerie synchronicity, each motion a mirror of the others, not because they were commanded, but because they reacted as one. Their footsteps fell in perfect rhythm, like the beating of a single great heart. A tremor rippled through the training grounds, a subtle quake, like the shifting of something deep beneath the earth. The soil beneath their boots shivered, then parted in hair-thin cracks, radiating outward like the lines of a growing crystal. The merged soldiers stopped moving all at once and looked toward the horizon. Seren, who had come to observe, followed their line of sight. There, just beyond the training grounds, a structure was rising. It grew not with machinery or scaffolding, but through organic assembly. Like coral forming in accelerated time, filaments the color of pale ivory and soft rose spiraled upward from the ground. They wove themselves together, forming arches and columns, latticework and spires, beautiful in a way that defied understanding. It resembled architecture, but also bone, sculpture, but also living tissue, a cathedral of memory and marrow, the choir of bone and silk. Oryx arrived moments later, breath caught in his throat. The structure pulsed faintly with the same rhythm as the chorus. It was not simply a building. It was an extension of the memory network, a locus, a node, a heart. "It is alive," Seren whispered. Vedra, who had followed Oryx, looked upon it with awe that bordered on worship. "It is made from the resonance fields of the merged. Their unity is beginning to manifest physically. The chorus does not only exist in thought, it reshapes matter itself." Oryx stepped forward, compelled and terrified in equal measure. The structure did not radiate malice. It radiated familiarity, recognition, as though it had been here long before the Dominion was born, simply waiting to be reawakened. Serene's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched. "Oryx, this changes everything. The chorus is not simply memory. It is creation. It is imprint. If it can shape the world, then we no longer know where it ends." Oryx's words were barely audible. "We must learn where it leads." Seren turned sharply. "No, that is what you always say. That curiosity is always forward moving. But there is no direction here. This is not progress. It is surrendering the shape of the world to something we do not understand." Oryx looked at him, truly looked, saw the man he trusted more than any other, saw the fear that was not born from ignorance but from love. "I am not surrendering the world," Oryx said softly. "I am trying to save it." Seren's voice broke. "At what cost?" Oryx had no answer, not because he did not know the cost, but because he had accepted it. That night, the streets of Caradrin filled with lantern light as news of the structure spread. Some came in fearful curiosity. Others fell to their knees in reverence. The merged stood among them, serene and still, their presence calming, their silence deep as ocean water. But not all were soothed. A small crowd formed at the southern gate. Voices loud, hands clenched, questions sharpened into anger. They shouted demands that the structure be destroyed, that the chorus be sealed, that Oryx step down, that Seren speak for them. And Seren stood among them, not as leader, but as one who understood their fear because he also felt it. He did not raise his voice. He did not call for revolt. He simply listened. And the people, finding themselves heard, grew quiet. In that quiet, Seren realized something. The Dominion had reached the point where it could no longer remain whole. Unity now meant surrender. Independence now meant fracture. The chorus pulsed faintly through the night, visible in the cathedral-like growth rising beyond the western gate. Above it, the star flickered, and far beyond the nebula, the Imperial fleet prepared its second approach. The Dominion was no longer simply choosing a future. It was becoming one. Night lay over Nacridus IX like a veil of dust. The sky dim and heavy, as though the dying star no longer had the strength to illuminate the world below. The choir of bone and silk rose in the west like a pale monument of memory and transformation. its surfaces pulsing faintly in rhythm, with the chorus buried deep in the planet's mantle. The structure seemed to breathe, inhaling the hopes of those who saw salvation in it, and exhaling dread into those who saw only the loss of everything familiar. The city did not sleep. Lanterns flickered along the avenues. People gathered in quiet clusters speaking in hushed urgency, and the air itself felt tense, like it knew something had shifted that could not be undone. The Imperial fleet had not advanced again, not yet, but its presence was like a blade suspended above the Dominion's throat, gleaming and patient. Seren made his way toward the Sovereign Spire, his steps slow but deliberate. He did not look at the people who watched him pass, though he felt the weight of their expectations. To some, he was the last voice of reason. To others, an obstacle delaying transcendence. To Oryx, he was still the one person who could speak to him without title or ceremony. He hoped that mattered still. Inside the spire, Oryx stood alone in the great hall, where murals of the Dominion's golden age adorned the walls. The paintings showed scholars debating beneath flowering trees, fleets exploring distant stars, architects shaping towers that glowed like captured dawn. Now those images felt like memories of a dream the world was waking from. Oryx did not turn when Seren entered, but his voice reached him quietly. "You came." Seren's reply was soft. "You knew I would." Oryx nodded. "Yes, you always return when you believe something can still be saved." Seren stepped beside him, standing shoulder to shoulder. "Something can be." Oryx finally looked at him. His eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of shaping a future no one else could see clearly. "You saw the choir," Oryx said. "You saw what the chorus is building with us. This is not destruction. It is creation. It is remembrance incarnate." Seren's voice did not rise, but it carried a depth that could not be ignored. "I saw people lose the edge of their laughter, the uncertainty of their fears, the personal imprint that made their memories theirs. The chorus does not preserve us. It preserves the shape of us, without the flaws that made us human." Oryx's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in sorrow. "You speak of flaws as though they are virtues." "They are," Seren said, and the word was firm. "Our imperfection is our meaning. We fail, we break, we suffer, and in spite of that we choose each other. The chorus offers eternity without the cost of pain, but pain is what allows us to love. Without it, memory has no weight. It is only record." The hall fell still. Oryx closed his eyes. "You do not understand what I have seen, Seren. I saw kingdoms fade and knowledge vanish into myth. I saw our works crumble. I felt the Dominion slipping from history long before the chorus was ever found. We were already fading. I could not accept that. I could not let us become dust." Serene's voice trembled, but with restraint, not weakness. I know why you chose this path. I have never doubted your heart, Oryx. I doubt only the thing you are trusting to save it." Oryx did not speak. Seren continued quietly. "We can stop here. The chorus has shown it can merge memory without consuming identity entirely. We can limit the process. Use it to preserve knowledge, not rewrite what we are. We can decide how to continue." Oryx opened his eyes slowly. "It is already too late to turn back." Seren's breath stopped, not because he had not feared those words, but because Oryx spoke them with certainty, not resignation. "The chorus is integrated into our infrastructure," Oryx said. "Its resonance threads through the merged, through the cathedral, through the planetary mantle itself. It is part of the Dominion now, and the people, enough of them, want it to continue. They fear being forgotten more than they fear being changed. Seren's silence was not agreement. Oryx went on, voice low. The Imperium will return with fire, to destroy us, to bury our memory for daring to hold on to it. We cannot defend ourselves as we are. Seren turned to him fully. So you intend to finish the transformation? Oryx held his gaze. Yes. The word struck like a blade drawn without hesitation. Seren inhaled slowly. Then I must say what I came here to say, before the path closes between us completely. Oryx waited. You asked once what it meant to rule, Oryx, and you answered yourself. To serve the people, not to remake them. But now you are remaking them because you cannot bear to lose them. You are not saving the Dominion. You are trying to save your heart from breaking. Oryx's breath trembled, not from weakness, but from truth striking in its deepest place. Seren stepped closer. We were born into time, Oryx, into change, into loss. That is not failure. That is life, and life ends. That is what gives it meaning. If you deny the end, you deny the meaning of everything that came before. Oryx did not look away. His voice, when it came, was soft. If the choice is between fading and becoming something that endures, I choose endurance. Seren's eyes closed. He had hoped. He had expected. But he had hoped. Oryx's voice gentled. You could join us. You would not lose yourself. You would simply no longer be alone in your memory. Seren opened his eyes. They were steady. I would rather remember alone than forget together. The silence between them was final, not broken, but understood. Oryx's hand lifted, reaching, not to command, not to compel, but simply to hold on. But Seren stepped back. The distance was small. It felt like a lifetime. Oryx lowered his hand. He did not ask again. Outside, the star flickered, its light dimming further. The choir of bone and silk pulsed in slow harmony. The Imperial fleet began its advance, and the Dominion held its breath. The second Imperial advance began at dawn, though dawn had become a muted thing on Nacridus IX. The sun rose like a pale ember behind a veil of ash-colored sky, its light faint and fragmented. On the horizon, the choir of bone and silk pulsed in rhythm with the chorus deep below, as though the planet itself had begun to breathe through a different set of lungs. Seren stood in the high courtyard of the Sovereign Spire, watching light spill across the city. He felt the change spreading, not as a sound, not as a movement, but as an atmospheric shift. Something subtle and irreversible. The merged walked with a calmness that no longer looked like peace, but inevitability. They no longer hesitated before choosing words. They no longer faltered in the small indecisions that once defined human life. They were full, whole, and terrifying in their serenity. The Dominion was no longer fragmenting. It was aligning. Seren's heart felt heavier than armor. The ground tremored beneath his feet. Low, deep vibrations steady as a heartbeat, but not his own. The Imperial fleet was approaching the atmosphere. Oryx stood at the edge of the courtyard, the violet light casting long shadows across the stone. He wore ceremonial armor, etched with symbols from the first founding of the Dominion, burnished gold now dimmed by the dying sun. His hair, once bright, had faded silver at the temples. He looked older now, not in body, but in burden. They did not speak at first. Silence had become their last shared language. When Oryx finally spoke, his voice was not hard. It was only heavy. They will strike the capital first. They intend to shatter our heart before they move to the world itself. Seren nodded. They do not fear the merged. They fear what the merged represent. A memory outside their God. A continuity that does not require their permission. Oryx exhaled. They believe annihilation is mercy. And you believe transformation is salvation, Seren said. No bitterness, only truth. Oryx turned to him, and his eyes held something that had been absent for weeks. Grief unshielded. I never wanted you to stand on the other side of me. Seren's chest tightened. Then don't ask me to cross. The tremors intensified. From the sky came the low roar of orbital bombardment thrusters warming, each one like thunder rolling across the heavens. The first wave of Imperial dropships split through the clouds in streaks of burning white, their armored hulls glowing with entry heat. Behind them, looming like cathedral towers of iron, came the warships of the Celestial Purity host, their banners unfurling, their gun decks opening. The city began to move. The merged soldiers marched in perfect unison, their armor matte white, marked only by faint luminescent traces beneath the skin. They took formation around the choir of bone and silk, forming a living perimeter, not guarding it, but being part of it. Their presence made the structure's pulse quicken, as though recognizing its own reflections. The unmerged citizens scattered, many seeking shelter, others joining resistance barricades, armed with fear more than weapons. Some wept, some prayed, many simply watched, uncertain which fate to root for. The first barrage struck the outer defensive rings. Shockwaves rippled across the plains, stirring dust into choking clouds. Towers of glass shattered, raining glittering fragments like frozen rain. The sky flashed with the fire of orbital guns. Oryx turned and began walking toward the courtyard stairs. Seren followed. They descended into the war corridors beneath the spire, where soldiers and strategists worked in focused silence. Holographic maps flickered with red markers. Imperial landing zones, advancing formations projected impact paths. General Vaughn approached, his voice graveled but controlled. The Imperials are making groundfall beyond the western ridge. Their primary advance vector is toward the choir. They recognize it as the Nexus. Oryx nodded. We meet them there. Seren spoke before he could stop himself. The choir is not the Dominion. The people are. If we abandon the city to defend the structure, we lose what we meant to save. Oryx turned sharply. No, the people will live through the choir. It holds every memory, every voice, every life. The shape of the Dominion is already there. Seren felt something break in him, not loudly, but cleanly, like glass under slow pressure. You no longer fight for the living, he whispered. Oryx did not deny it. The palace shook, dust falling from the vaulted ceilings, banners trembling. Sirens echoed through the corridors. Seren took a breath and stepped closer. Oryx, listen to me. The empire you loved was built by hands and hearts, not by memory stored in a single mind. If the Dominion survives only as the chorus, then it is not the Dominion. It is a monument, and monuments do not feel. They do not love. They only remember. Oryx's eyes flickered, the smallest fracture of certainty, but the chorus pulsed behind it, steady and sure. There is no path left that does not ask us to sacrifice, Oryx said quietly. This is the sacrifice that preserves us. Seren shook his head slowly. No, Oryx. This is the sacrifice that ends us. Another tremor shook the spire, stronger, closer. The sound of war was no longer distant. It was at the walls. Oryx stepped back, not from Seren, but from choice. There is no more time, he said. He turned to General Vaughn. Mobilize the merged vanguard. Prepare the resonance uplink. The choir will stand. Seren watched him. Watched the man he loved as brother walk toward destiny shaped not by hope, but fear disguised as purpose. Seren knew then that nothing he said could turn the path Oryx had chosen. But something else remained. Action. Even if it meant standing alone. He left the war room without a word. Oryx did not call him back. Outside, the city roared with conflict. Imperial dropships erupted across the valley, their hatches bursting open as armored forms surged forward. The celestial host advanced with unwavering discipline, their armor embossed with prayers of purity, their visors glowing with zeal. The merged met them. The clash was unlike war had ever been. The merged moved as one, silent, fluid, terrifying. They did not break ranks. They did not scream. They killed efficiently, gracefully, like dancers shaped by memory instead of instinct. The Imperials fought with conviction sharpened by doctrine. Their chants rose like hymns. Their blades swung like judgment. Their armor shone like wrath. The valley became a symphony of belief colliding with belief. Seren moved through the chaos, not toward the battle, but toward the choir itself. He passed fleeing civilians, kneeling citizens, and merged soldiers who did not even glance at him. He was known to them, recognized, not aligned, but not yet enemy. The choir pulsed before him, towering, luminous, alive. He stepped inside. The air shifted immediately, warm, resonant, filled with whispers of memory not his own. The walls glowed with threads of thought. Faces he recognized, voices he had known, laughter, grief, childhood songs. The chorus held everything, everything that had ever mattered, everything Oryx had wanted to preserve. And Seren understood the seduction fully at last. This was not the erasure of identity. This was the erasure of loneliness. He placed his hand against the living surface. It pulsed once, gently, like a welcome. He closed his eyes. "I know," he whispered. "I know why he chose you." A pulse, soft, warm, love even. Serene's eyes opened. "I cannot let him give himself to you." The choir did not react in anger. It did not need to. Seren stepped back and drew the blade at his side. Outside, the palace walls began to fall. Above, the Imperials surged, and Oryx, sovereign of the Dominion, walked into the storm with the merged at his side, believing he was leading his people to eternity. He did not know Seren was no longer trying to save the Dominion. Seren was trying to save Oryx. The choir of bone and silk glowed faintly around Seren, the inner chamber suffused with a warm, pulsing luminescence that seemed to breathe with him. It was quiet here, quieter than the world outside had ever been. The screams and clash of war beyond the structure's walls seemed distant, as though muffled by layers of time. The chorus did not speak in words, yet Seren felt its awareness, a presence vast and ancient, patient enough to wait out the lifetime of stars. It did not judge him. That was what unnerved him most. There was no anger in it, no hunger, only welcome. It understood his fear. It understood his grief. It understood his love. It offered itself as answer. But answers without cost were lies. Outside, the city was burning. The first great bombardment from the Imperial fleet struck the upper districts, scattering towers of glass and memory into falling shards that glittered as they tumbled. The air filled with fire and dust. Streets that once carried scholars and children now carried soldiers and flame. The merged fought in perfect unity, their forms moving through destruction as though they were gliding over a remembered dance. Oryx was among them, not commanding from a distance, but standing where the line broke hardest. He did not shout orders. He did not need to. The merged sensed intent, moved with him, protected him. He was not merely their leader. He was already becoming their center. The chorus hummed softly through them, a shared pulse that synchronized thought and motion. Oryx's blade traced arcs of golden arclight through the air, scattering the zealot soldiers of the celestial purity host. He fought without violence in his expression, as though each strike was simply the final note in an already written song. The Imperials shouted litanies of purification as they fell, their conviction clashing with the serene determination of those who believed themselves already immortal. But the Imperium was vast. It always had been, and devout certainty does not wither just because it meets something unafraid. More landing craft descended like falling stars. Oryx lifted his gaze toward the sky, toward the fire, the fleet, the weight of a galaxy that feared memory it did not control. His armor was cracked and scorched, his breath ragged, but his eyes shone. If he could bring the Dominion into the chorus fully, if merging became completion rather than transformation, then their survival would no longer depend on bodies of flesh or cities of stone. The Dominion would live beyond destruction. He looked toward the choir of bone and silk. He began to move toward it. Inside the choir, Seren stood motionless, his hand still resting on the living wall. The structure's pulse slowed, mirroring his breath. It was listening. Seren closed his eyes and let the weight of memory fill him. Shared laughter under orchard trees, arguments that lasted until dawn, celebrations of triumph and shared mourning of loss. He saw Oryx not as sovereign, not as leader of armies, but as the boy he had walked beside long before crowns or wars or ancient voices shaped their paths. They had once believed they would grow old together, that the Dominion would thrive in peace, that their legacy would be the lives they touched, not the history they forced into eternity. The chorus offered Oryx a way to never lose anything again. Seren understood the seduction because he felt it too. But love, when it cannot bear loss, becomes something else. Seren stepped back from the wall. The chorus did not resist. It did not reach for him. It was patient. It did not need to compel. Oryx would come willingly. Seren moved deeper into the structure, his footsteps echoing against pale organic floors that felt neither stone nor bone, but something between. The walls rippled faintly at his passing, as though they recognized him. The inner sanctum lay ahead, a chamber where merging could occur fully, where Oryx intended to bind the Dominion's fate to the chorus forever. Threads of memory hung suspended in the air like strands of light, flickering with images of those who had already merged, faces frozen in expressions of peace. Seren felt the shape of the choice before him. To stop Oryx meant to fracture the Dominion irreparably. It meant civil war in the midst of apocalypse. It meant pain, death, loss. But allowing Oryx to enter the final merging meant the Dominion would cease to be a people at all. It would become memory without choice, harmony without voice, eternity without soul. He heard Oryx's footsteps before he saw him, steady, unhurried, certain. Seren turned to face him as he entered the chamber. Oryx stopped when he saw him there, framed by the living glow of the chorus. There was no surprise in his face, only sadness. "You knew I would come here," Oryx said softly. Seren nodded. "I did." Oryx approached slowly, one hand resting on the hilt of his blade, not in threat, but because it was part of him now, as much as memory was part of the chorus. "It doesn't have to be a battle," Oryx said. "You can come with me. We can complete this together. You don't have to lose me." Seren's breath shook, not with fear, but with everything he had ever held back. "But I will lose you if you do this." Oryx's voice trembled. "No, you will join me. You will never be alone again." Seren stepped forward, and his voice cracked the air with quiet force. I would rather remember you as you are than share eternity with something that only resembles you. Oryx flinched, not from the words, but from the truth inside them. The chorus pulsed, sensing the moment. Oryx reached out his hand, not to command, but to ask. Seren. Seren shook his head. The choice unfolded like a blade drawn slowly. Oryx inhaled, closing his eyes. Then you will stand against me. Seren's reply was a whisper full of love and grief. I will stand for you, even if it means standing in your way. Oryx opened his eyes, and the two men who had once dreamed of shaping the world together now stood at the threshold of ending it. Outside, the palace walls crumbled under the Imperial barrage. The merged formed phalanx lines, holding back zealot blades with perfect unity. Flames rose into a sky too dim to extinguish them. The Dominion shook. In the sanctum, Oryx drew his blade. Seren did the same. No hatred, no rage, only tragedy. The chorus pulsed again. Slow, steady, patient. It had seen such endings before. The world trembled. The empire began to fall, and the two souls at its heart prepared to break. Steel met steel in the quiet heart of the choir of bone and silk, but the first clash was not loud. It rang softly, like a bell struck in mourning rather than war. Oryx and Seren stepped and turned, each movement measured, deliberate, almost reverent. They had trained together once, long before crowns and legions, back when swords were simply a discipline of balance and discipline, not the language of endings. Their blades remembered each other. Their bodies remembered each other. The air remembered them both. Seren parried Oryx's first strike with practiced ease, but when their eyes met, the pain there was deeper than fear. Oryx was not driven by fury. He fought with purpose, as though he was completing something inevitable, the final step in a path that had always been leading here. Seren moved with the effort of someone trying to hold back the tide with his bare hands. You don't have to do this, Seren breathed, stepping aside rather than driving forward. You can still choose another way. Oryx pivoted, the arc of his blade clean, beautiful, almost sorrowful. There is no other way. If the Dominion falls here, we will be nothing, lost, forgotten. His voice tightened, cracking at the edges, though his movements stayed perfectly controlled. I cannot let our history dissolve to dust. Seren exhaled, blocking another strike, his arms trembling, not from strain, but from everything held in his chest. Then let it be remembered by those who live, not by a thing that cannot feel. Oryx faltered, just slightly, just enough. Seren saw it, felt the tremor ripple through him, but Oryx pushed forward again, not allowing hesitation to root itself. Sparks lit between them as blades met in a spiral of sweeping motion, one pushing toward unbroken eternity, the other trying to preserve the meaning of endings. Outside, the war thundered on. The Imperial Purity host advanced through the burning streets, their hymns echoing through shattered arches and collapsed towers. The merged held the line without sound, without fear, without hesitation. They moved like a single mind inhabiting many forms, a unity of purpose, a choir of bodies. Their white armor gleamed beneath the dimming sun, their eyes glowing faintly with the chorus's resonance. The celestial host fought with equal conviction. Their aim was purification, destruction of the Xeno, the aberration, the impossible. Flames roared across the city's foundation stones. The Dominion's great libraries cracked under bombardment. The gardens where scholars once debated had melted into scorched shapes of blackened branches. The city was becoming memory even as it lived. The choir pulsed deeper. Inside the sanctum, Oryx and Seren circled one another again. Oryx's breaths came slower now, not from weakness, but from the weight of realization. Seren's blade was steady, Seren himself, unbroken. You would let everything we built fade into nothing, Oryx said, his voice low. Decades of knowledge, art, voices, laughter, my ancestors, yours, ours. Seren lowered his blade slightly, not as surrender, but as plea. Oryx, nothing is nothing. Memory in the hearts of the living is enough. We do not need to become eternal to matter. Oryx's jaw tightened. But I do. Serene's expression cracked with grief. I know. Oryx's defenses opened for the briefest instant. Serene could have struck, could have ended it there. He did not. Oryx stepped back, not in advantage, but in understanding. The chorus pulsed around them, the walls shifting subtly, as though leaning in to listen. Seren drew a slow breath, his voice barely above a whisper. You are afraid of being forgotten, but you were never forgettable. Not to me, not to anyone who truly lived in this dominion. You are fighting the shadow of a world that has not even ended yet. Oryx closed his eyes. His hand trembled around the hilt. I know, he said, and still, I cannot stop. Seren did not breathe for a moment, because he understood, because he had always understood. The next clash was heavier, no longer graceful. Oryx pushed forward, desperation bleeding into resolve. Seren yielded ground, but refused to break. The chamber resonated with each impact, the chorus's pulse syncing with the rhythm of their fight. Memory flickered in the walls like reflections on water, moments shared between them, caught and replayed without sound. Oryx studying maps by candlelight, Seren laughing in the orchard courtyard, the two of them walking beneath falling leaves as autumn returned again and again. The chorus preserved memory without emotion. Seren felt tears burn. Oryx pressed harder, strikes sharper now, blade singing in solemn arc. Seren blocked a downward cut, but the impact drove him to one knee. Oryx stepped forward to finish it, then stopped, frozen, blade pressing against Seren's shoulder rather than throat. His hand shook. His breath fractured. He could not kill him. He had never been able to. Seren rose slowly, pushing the blade aside with his own. The battle paused. Not ended. Paused. Oryx's voice broke. If I stop now, then everything we ever fought for, everything we built will fade. I cannot watch that happen. I will not. Seren looked at him with all the love and devastation of a lifetime. Then let it fade with dignity. Let it end as something beautiful, not as something that devoured itself trying to escape the inevitable. Oryx's face contorted. Pain and longing and fury and love all tangled together. I don't know how to let go. Seren stepped forward and placed his free hand against Oryx's cheek. The gesture so gentle it felt like memory itself. Then I will do it for you. Oryx's eyes widened, realization and heartbreak blooming at the same instant. Seren moved, not fast, not fierce, but sure. His blade slid between armor plates, beneath the rib, through the place where the heartbeat still lived. Oryx gasped, breath catching in his throat. The sword did not strike with violence. It entered like forgiveness, like release. The chorus pulsed, sharply, like a gasp. Oryx's knees weakened. Seren caught him, held him, lowered him to the floor as though he were laying him down to sleep. Oryx's voice was small, young. Will they remember me? Seren's tears fell freely now. I will remember you, for every day I have left. Oryx's breath shuddered. Thank you. His hand tightened once on Seren's, then loosened. The glow in his eyes dimmed. The chorus's pulse wavered, unsteady, uncertain. The choir's walls flickered as though confused. The merged outside faltered mid-strike, movements losing perfect unity. The song of their shared mind frayed. The dominion did not break in an explosion. It exhaled, a long, deep exhale. Oryx was still. Seren knelt there, holding him. Outside, the Imperial legions continued their advance. The city burned. The merged faltered, then fought again. Not with unity now, but with raw human grief. The chorus dimmed, not dead, but changed. It had lost its heart. Seren closed Oryx's eyes with shaking fingers and whispered, "I will carry you." The palace trembled overhead. The dominion collapsed around them, and the era ended. The choir of bone and silk dimmed to a soft, pulsing glow, as though the great structure were breathing slower now, mourning in a rhythm only the world itself could hear. Seren remained kneeling for a long time, Oryx's weight resting gently against him, the stillness around them settling like dust in an abandoned sanctuary. The chamber seemed to fold inward, its warm luminescence becoming subdued, muted, almost tender. There were no voices now. The chorus, once a layered whisper of countless memories, had fallen into quiet. Not absence, quiet, as though grief was a language it had learned just in that moment. Outside, the battle continued, but no longer with the eerie harmony that had defined the merged. Their movements were still precise, still disciplined, but the unity had fractured. Their steps, once synchronized, now staggered in heartbreak. Their blades, once moving with shared intent, now swung with raw individual grief and fear. The seamless bond between them had relied on Oryx, not consciously, but as a guiding locus, as the emotional gravity toward which they aligned. Without him, the chorus no longer had a focal point. Without him, it remembered, but it did not lead. Seren gently lowered Oryx onto the smooth living floor of the sanctum, the blade still sheathed in his chest. His fingers brushed Oryx's hair back from his brow, the gesture as natural as breathing. There were no last words to speak. Every word that mattered had already been said before they ever lifted their blades. He rose slowly. The world outside needed him. He passed through the cathedral corridors, each surface flickering faint images. Oryx speaking to the council in the days of prosperity. Seren laughing with children in the education forums. The great celebrations of the summer festivals. The memories were beautiful, preserved in perfect clarity. But they were only memories now. When Seren stepped out into the open air, the sky was blackened with smoke. Ash drifted like snow across the city. The street, where scholars once painted murals beneath blooming trellises, was now cracked and broken, its stones fractured by artillery and the tread of armoured boots. Fires burned in the distance. The lamentations of the living and the dying rose together in a chorus that no longer resembled unity, but something far more human. Seren walked without hesitation toward the heart of the conflict. The merge saw him and parted in silence. They did not need explanation. They understood. They felt the absence. They recognized the grief. Some bowed their heads. Others froze where they stood, as though waiting for guidance that no longer came easily. He placed his hand on the shoulder of the nearest merged soldier. Her eyes glowed faintly still, though dimmer now. "He is gone," Seren said. The soldier closed her eyes. When she opened them, the shine in them trembled. "We know." They stood like that for a moment, in the middle of a battlefield that had no patience for grief. Then Seren turned toward the advancing Imperial line. The celestial purity host had broken through the western barricade, their armor stained with ash and streaked with the blood of both sides. They moved like a tide of iron, hymns spilling from their helm speakers in resonant monotone. Seren walked forward, not to fight, to stand. Whether the merge followed him was not his decision to make. They had freedom again, terrible, painful freedom. And one by one, they did follow, not as a single mind, as individuals who chose the same answer. The Imperials slowed, confused by the lack of formation. They expected resistance. They expected violence. A wall of blades, not a silent line of weary, grieving figures simply standing. Seren raised his voice, not with power, but with clarity. Oryx Valen is dead. The Imperial vanguard halted. A command channel flickered. The chanting quieted. Seren continued, his tone steady despite the tremor in his chest. The merging ends here. The Dominion surrenders. The words moved through the battlefield like a wind that extinguishes flame. The celestial paladin at the front of the Imperial host stepped forward, his armor towering, his blade heavy with ritual significance. His helm concealed his expression, but his voice carried unshakable doctrine. Heresy ends only with cleansing. The creature beneath this world must be destroyed. The taint must be purged. Seren didn't flinch. The chorus is no longer what it was. Without Oryx, it has no anchor. It does not command. It does not spread. It only remembers. Silence. The wind carried the faint, slow pulse of the choir. Seren gestured upward to the broken spires of the capital, to the crumbling foundations, to the burning horizon. If it is destroyed now, then everything that ever lived here dies a second time. Every voice, every song, every love, every lesson. Let us be remembered. Let us not vanish. The paladin did not answer at once. This was no longer a conflict of arms. It was a conflict of doctrine. And doctrine yields only when forced. One of the merged stepped forward, Jalen, the philosopher-poet, the first to undergo deep merging. His eyes glowed faintly still, but his voice was unmistakably his own. He spoke to the paladin, his tone soft but unwavering. I remember my mother's voice. I remember the way she sang when she baked bread at dawn. I remember the warmth of her laughter. The chorus did not take that from me. It let me hold it without pain. Do not take it from me now. Another merge stepped forward, then another, then more. Each spoke, not with unity, but with uniqueness. I remember the scent of the orchards in summer. I remember my partner's hand in mine on the day the last fountain was completed. I remember the first snowfall after the peace accords. I remember what it meant to be human. They did not plead. They testified. The paladin stood motionless. The war paused. But the Imperium is vast, and history has seen mercy crushed beneath the weight of certainty more times than hope would like to recall. At last, the paladin spoke, voice heavy with decree. No xeno-memory may endure. No system outside the Emperor's will may remain. The merged bowed their heads, not in surrender, but in farewell. Seren felt his heart fracture, not like something shattering, but like something finally giving up the strength to hold. He closed his eyes. I understand. He turned to the merged. Go, leave the city. Carry your memories into the quiet places. Live small, live simply, live long. That is how we remain. Some wept, some nodded, some hesitated, then stepped back. They dispersed, not as soldiers, but as survivors. The Imperials did not stop them. Their war was not with the living now. It was with the chorus. The bombardment that followed was precise and absolute. The choir of bone and silk cracked first, then fell. The chorus beneath the world resisted, not with violence, but with the ache of a mind losing itself. The pulse slowed, faded, quieted. Seren stood at the edge of the collapsing city, ash falling around him like pale snow, and whispered to the wind, "He will not be forgotten. Not by him, not by those who lived, not by the chorus, even in silence." The dominion was gone, but memory remained, breathing quietly. In the long silence that followed, the fires burned for 3 days before the winds finally carried the last of the smoke across the plains. When the ash settled, Nacridus IX lay quiet beneath the dimming sun. The great spires of the capital were broken ribs of stone and crystal, jutting into the sky like the remains of something once magnificent. The fountains ran dry. The orchards had burned to black silhouettes. The plazas where children once played and scholars once argued now lay silent, covered in a thin, pale layer of dust. But the silence was not empty. It was full of memory. Seren walked alone through the ruins of the city. His steps made soft prints in the ash, which collapsed behind him, erasing his trail. The destruction was not total. Not like some worlds where the Imperium burned everything to glass. The Imperium had seen that the merging had ended. The chorus had dimmed. The organism was no longer expanding, no longer shaping, no longer transforming. It remembered, but remembrance alone did not violate doctrine. The celestial host withdrew once the central structure fell. They left without ceremony, without cruelty, without mercy. They had done their work. To them, justice had been carried out. Seren had watched them go without speaking. He knew they would never understand. The chorus now lay deep beneath the earth, diminished to an echo. No longer pulsing through streets and mines, no longer shaping stone and bone. It did not call. It did not yearn. It simply remained, an ancient memory waiting, as it always had. Seren paused at the steps of what once had been the Palace of Glass. The great mural arch still stood, fractured but recognizable. It depicted the founding of the Dominion, Oryx's ancestors standing before a rising sun, hands raised to shape a future that seemed boundless. Now the sun behind the mural was dim and tired. Seren sat on the stone steps and let the quiet fill him. He could feel Oryx here, not through memory in the chorus, not through some lingering psychic imprint, but simply because love does not vanish when the world ends. It settles into the shape of the heart. The merged who had survived scattered outward, just as Seren had told them. They traveled to the world's quieter regions, mountain villages, river plains, forests untouched by war. They did not gather. They did not form a new unity. They lived as individuals again, each carrying their memories like a lantern against the dark. They would pass on their stories to those they trusted. Some would whisper them as legend. Others would keep them silent, sacred. Oryx would not be forgotten, not as a god, not as a conqueror, as a man. Seren rose again and walked toward the western ridge. The wind was cool there. The sky opened wide, showing stars now faint in daytime's thin light. The violet expanse nebula shimmered on the horizon, distant and bruised purple, like a wound in the fabric of the galaxy. The Imperial fleet had departed into that region, leaving behind only contrails of their warp wake. Seren sat among the broken stone and watched the nebula breathe. He did not know how much time passed, minutes, hours, but eventually the faint pulse of the chorus stirred at the edge of his mind, not intruding, not drawing him in, just being. He closed his eyes and listened. It did not speak in words. It remembered. Oryx's laughter in early summer, the way the orchard smelled after rain, the murals painted with flourishes of green and gold, the warmth of shared wine, the long debates that ended in understanding rather than victory, the quiet of starlit nights when neither felt alone. Seren breathed slowly. "Thank you," he whispered. The chorus pulsed once, soft and distant. He did not fear it now. It no longer sought to merge. It no longer sought eternity. Oryx's death had taught it something even its ancient memory had not held. To love and lose is not failure. It is the condition of being alive. The galaxy moved on. Centuries passed. Nacridus IX was marked on imperial star charts as a world of minimal strategic value, a place once touched by an anomaly long since rendered inert. It became a footnote, a cautionary line in a scholar's lecture, a brief entry in a cleric's sermon against the dangers of seeking eternity outside the Emperor's light. But people are not made of documents. Stories survived. Travellers spoke of a world where the wind carried voices if one stood very still. Pilgrims came and left offerings at the foot of a shattered spire, not to pray, but to remember someone they had never met. Children born in distant colonies heard tales of a king who loved his people so fiercely he tried to save them from time itself. Some believed the tales. Most did not. But belief was never the point. Memory was. Deep beneath the earth, where stone meets old sleeping synapses of the chorus, a small, steady pulse continued. Not strong, not directive, not hungry, just present. It held no empire now, no unity, no command, only echoes. Oryx's last breath, Serene's last words to him, the way the Dominion's great bell sounded at sunset, 1,000 voices laughing, 1,000 voices grieving, 1,000 moments that mattered because they ended. In the warp, where time folds into itself and meaning becomes fluid, memory does not fade the way flesh does. Stories become currents, regret becomes gravity, love becomes light, and somewhere, whether in dream or warp echo, or the place where souls rest when history forgets them, two figures walked again among lantern-lit gardens beneath a living sky, not immortal, just remembered. Serene's voice carried into the quiet of what remained. "We lived. That is enough." The quiet answered, "It is enough." The Dominion was gone, but the memory remained, not eternal, human. And that was its triumph.